Everybody. Today in this video I'd like to address another issue of the mainstream Christian apologetics that I consider very important and very mind-boggling, and that has been bothering me for quite a long time, and that is the issue of God's logic being contrary to human logic, or human logic being contrary to God's ways or God's logic. And if you open and read some Christian apologetic literature or some Christian Bible commentaries, or even some sermons, for example, you're going to find out that some, if not most, Christians and Christian theologians and apologists claim and argue that, and they use the Bible verses from Isaiah and other verses as well, but Isaiah 55:8 and 9, where it says that, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." Or another translation, "My thoughts are nothing like your thoughts, and my ways are far beyond anything you could imagine," etc., etc. And then 55:9, "As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Or, "For just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts." And so, these Christians are arguing that human logic, apart from human logic being contrary to God's logic, God is not subject to human logic, and that God's logic is like diametrically opposite of human logic. So if your reasoning and your logic, like the human logic, the three fundamental laws of thought, are diametrically opposite of God's laws of thought and God's logic. And so in this line of reasoning, if, let's say, we're two or more Christians, or even human beings, agreeing that, yes, God's ways are higher than human ways, and God's logic is contrary to human logic. And if we agree that, yeah, because God is so omnipotent and so powerful and so beyond human understanding, it's only logical that God's logic would be diametrically opposite of human logic, would be contrary to human logic. And if we agree to that, what are we? We are human beings. And we cannot agree really in your heart, so to speak. You cannot consent or accept or be convinced of something. And I'm talking about if you're really convinced that, yeah, that is true and that makes sense, that God's ways will be contrary to human ways and human logic, or vice versa. It's the same. Or human logic is contrary to God's logic. Using our human faculties, capacities, then it automatically, because us being human beings, that would automatically negate the claim or the argument that God's logic is contrary to human logic. Because if you really, in your heart, are convinced that God's ways are contrary to human way, and God's logic is contrary to human logic, then you being human and using your human logic, and that human logic being according to the Bible flawed, that automatically negates the claim that God's logic is contrary to human logic. I'll address that and give you examples, and I plan to address that more in detail in another video. But I just want to mention real quick that if we accept that claim, and as human beings, that would mean an automatic negation of the claim, of the Christian claim, that God's ways are contrary to human ways. Because the human mind, the way it functions is that it cannot be convinced of something. I'm talking about really be convinced and agreeing on a certain proposition or an argument and saying, yes, I agree to that. I conclude that, and I agree with you when you say that God's logic is contrary to man's logic or to human logic. The human mind cannot consent or agree to something if it doesn't believe it to be true. But then if it finds sense, in other words, if you say, yeah, that makes sense, that God being so omnipotent and so much higher and above us, that it would make sense that God's ways are totally contrary and God's logic is totally contrary to human logic, then you're accepting and agreeing to something that makes sense for you and that in itself has reason in itself for you. And if it has reason in itself for you, that means it agrees with human logic. But then human logic being totally contrary to God's logic, that will be a flawed conclusion. And there will be also a false conclusion. In other words, you will be agreeing to something that is, and believing and accepting something that is false and flawed, which is that God's logic is contrary to human logic. I plan to address that issue in at least one more, if not more, one or if not more videos, and giving you some examples. And that will be it for now. Thank you very much for watching and listening, and until the next time, bye.